verses 25 to 27. We've just heard those rather ominous words at the end of verse 24. Ufnei melech lo ra'ah, and the face of the king he did not see. Now I've arranged this paragraph so that you can see that in verse 28, the main thread, the main line of the text is picked up again. In verse 28, Absalom dwelt in Jerusalem 2 years of days, so 2 full years, and the face of the king he did not see. So you can see how the idea in verse 24 is picked up in verse 28. So what we have in verses 25 to 27 is one of those interludes, one of those breaking out of the main line, the main thrust of the passage, breaking out of that, a disruption of the Vayiktol chain, to put it in grammatical terms like that, in order to give us essential background information. Remember, one of the things that Robert Alter talks about is, when are we fed these bits of background information? Sometimes at the very beginning of an entire passage, sometimes midway through a passage, for varying effects. At any rate, you can see that verse 25, Ucha Absalom, is not a Vayiktol, so it's broken the Vayiktol chain. So there is our sort of grammatical evidence that we're dealing with background here. You can see as well that the Masoretic text has very helpfully given us a paragraph break just before the interlude and a paragraph break just after the interlude. So this entire paragraph, 25 to 27, is marked off by those paragraph breaks as well. Now, verse 25 is one of those verses, sadly they're quite frequent in the Hebrew Bible, which the sense of the verse is very clear, but the precise way that each element is to be interpreted is very difficult to discern. There are various options, each of which make some sense, and so it's very hard to decide between. So I'm just going to give you a couple of options. I'm going to take ish yafeh as noun plus an attributive adjective. Ish yafeh, good-looking man. You could, I think, just about make sense of this yafeh as a predicate. A man is good-looking. So remember the attributive, a good-looking man, the predicative, a man is good-looking. You can make sense of it in both ways. I think it is more likely here, and certainly I think the accents point us towards seeing this as a single phrase, noun plus attributive adjective. So I'm only going to present you 2 options, and we're not going to consider the option of this being a predicate adjective at all. Okay, verse 25. Ucha Absalom lo haya ish yafeh b'chol Yisrael lehalel ma'od. Mikaf raglo va'ad kodkodo lo haya vo mum. Okay, the first half of the verse is the tricky part, and in particular this lehalel ma'od at the end. Let's work through it word by word. Ucha Absalom, and like Absalom. Remember, we can use the kaf plus an adjective for comparisons. X is like this, or yeah. So, and like Absalom, lo haya, there was not, ish yafeh, a good-looking man, b'chol Yisrael, in the whole of Israel, lehalel ma'od. Lehalel is an infinitive construct of the Piel of Hillel. Hillel, to praise. Lehalel ma'od, to praise greatly, or too much praising. Now it's the sense of this too much praising which is a little bit convoluted and difficult to discern. Two options then. First option is to take this as a result. The le plus infinitive construct can give you some sort of sense of result. Or to put actually the similar point in a slightly different way, it can be our lamed of respect. So, like Absalom, there was not a good-looking man in all Israel with respect to much praising. Now, how would I put that together? Something like the NIV, in all Israel, there was not a man so highly praised for his handsomeness as Absalom. In all Israel, there was no man so highly praised for his handsomeness as Absalom. Okay, so the lamed plus infinitive gives us the result. There was no man who was like, no handsome man was like Absalom, with the result of much praising, or to put the same, in effect, the same idea, the lamed of respect. In what way was there not another good-looking man like Absalom? Inasmuch as he was highly praised. So in all Israel there was not a man so highly praised for his handsomeness as Absalom. Okay, so that would be the first alternative. The second alternative is that this lehalel can have a sense of obligation. So, like Absalom, there was not a good-looking man in all Israel requiring or obligating much praising, to put it very, very roughly. And something like the JPS, now in all Israel there was none to be so much praised as Absalom for his beauty. I think that goes down this route of sort of obligation. And something like the ESV, now in all Israel there was no one so much to be praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. Okay, that is rather fine-grained. I present both of those options. I don't expect you at this stage to be sort of really drilling down and weighing these different options critically. But I do want you, as I've said before, to be able to pin down your translation very accurately to the words themselves, rather than just leaving the vague sense floating somewhere above the Hebrew text itself. So in sum, the lehalel ma'od can be with respect to. There was no good-looking man like Absalom in all Israel with respect to much praising. In other words, there was no man so highly praised. Or, sense of obligation, there was no good-looking man in all Israel like Absalom requiring much praising or obligating much praising. There was nobody to be so highly praised. Phew. Second half of the verse is much more straightforward. Mikaf raglo, from the sole of his foot, va'ad kod kodo, and to the top of his head, lo haya vo mum, there was not in him or on him a blemish. Code is a less common word for rosh, head, or skull. Sometimes code can be. So from the sole of his foot to the top of his head, the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. Verse 26 itself has some very tricky elements. Mostly, though, we can sort out the difficulty if we understand that halfway through the verse we in effect have a sentence in parentheses. And in fact, I have put those parentheses in the text for you. They're obviously not there in the Hebrew text itself, but I put them in yellow to make the sense of the verse clearer. So first of all, what we'll do is to translate the verse without the parentheses, and then we'll come back and go through the text in the parentheses. V'galacho et rosho. Here we have our classic temporal clause. And bet plus infinitive construct can be kaf or bet. Galacho, galacha used in the piale is to shave. So here we have his shaving, infinitive construct in the piale, plus his, plus the temporal clause bet, plus and. And in his shaving, et rosho, when he shaved his head, leaving the parentheses aside for a moment, shakal et sa'ar rosho, he would weigh the hair of his head. Shakal is a katal because this is giving us background information which is habitual, repetitive. We will see when we do the parentheses that this is something that happened yearly. So when he shaved his head, he would, or he used to, weigh the hair of his head 200 shekalim, and it was 200 shekels be'even hamelech, according to the king's stone. So according to the king's official, the royal standard, as it were, or the king's weight. Okay, so there's our verse without the parentheses. It's giving us something habitual that Absalom used to do. Now let's go through the bit in brackets. V'haya, a v'katal, again this is giving us habitual information. It would be, or it used to be, or it would be, mikates, from the end or at the end of yamim layamim. Now this phrase, yamim layamim, or sometimes miyamim layamim, from days to days, or sometimes a slightly different phrase, miyamim yamima, from daysward, as it were. Several variants of this particular phrase can be something general, like from time to time, but it can also mean annually. Probably the clearest instance, or at least the clearest one that comes to mind as I'm speaking, is in 1 Samuel chapter 1, when Hannah would go with her husband up to the temple annually, miyamim yamima, to make sacrifices. Elkanah and his two wives, Hannah and Peninnah, would go up to the temple to make a sacrifice, miyamim yamima, and in the context, it seems to mean annually. He would go to the annual sacrifice, and so I think you could translate this at the end of time to time, but the Mikate seems to be pushing for something a bit more specific at the end of a specific period, and so I think translations tend to go for the viable alternative annually. at the end of each year, or it would be at the end of each year, which, or that in this context, it would be at the end of each year that he would shave his head, is the implicit object. It would be at the end, so he used to shave his head at the end of each year. Ki, because, kaved alav, because it was heavy upon him. Again, the sense here, the implicit sense is that his hair grew too heavy for him. V'gilecho, and so he would shave it. Another v'katal for this habitual action. And so it would be at the end of each year that he would shave, for the hair grew heavy upon him and he would shave it off. So there is our parenthesis, giving us the time frame for the shaving and also the reason for the shaving. Verse 27. Vayivaldu. So now we've moved on from his handsomeness and from his thick-hairedness, and we're moving instead to talk about his family. Although, as we'll see, the idea of beauty comes back imminently. Vayivaldu la'Absalom shlosha vanim uvat achat ushma Tamar. Hi hayta isha yafat mar'eh. Vayivaldu is a nifal, imperfect, vayiktol, so yalad to bear. No lad, nifal, he was born. Yivaleid, in the imperfect, yivaleid. Remember, the nifal is the only imperfect form where you end up with a doubling of the first root letter. Piel, you double the middle root letter. Nifal, imperfect, you end up doubling the first root letter because the nun of the nifal has got squashed into that first root letter. So, they were born to Absalom 3 sons and 1 daughter. So 3 sons and a daughter were born to Absalom. We don't hear about the sons, but we do hear about the daughter. In fact, not just her name, but also a characteristic. And we've spoken in class before about how this very emotively ties back to his feelings towards Tamar, his sister, who has been defiled by Amnon. So here at the end of this little new burst of information, just before we get into the details of the coup, of Absalom's coup, we have this very beautiful detail that he has a daughter, Ushma Tamar, and her name was Tamar, and she was very beautiful. Or she was a woman beautiful of appearance. It's a very moving little tribute, actually. Now, not wanting to spoil the moment, but we should talk about the grammar here of Yafat Mar'eh. She was a woman beautiful of appearance. We could have just had the adjective Yafa here. Hi hayata isha yafa. She was a beautiful woman. But we get this, it's not unusual, but I'm not sure that we've spoken about it up to now. where you have an adjective in construct with a following noun. She was beautiful of appearance. So, just to recap the process of turning something into the construct. You prepare the ending. In this case, are becomes art. Now let me see, can I change that? There we go, good. Are becomes art. Step number 2, you look for any karmetzes in unstressed open syllables. Remember now the stress, because I'm putting this into the construct, the stress is now on the next word, on the X, so all of this word is functionally unstressed. So this ya, there is a karmetz in an unstressed open syllable. So that changes to a shava. Next we look for karmetzes in unstressed closed syllables. And here I've got fat, which is a closed syllable with a karmetz in the middle, and it's unstressed because, as I said before, my X, the next word is what is stressed, and a karmetz in an unstressed closed syllable becomes a patach, yafat. So yafa in the absolute becomes yafat in the construct, beautiful of appearance.